The year was 1220, and the ancient city of Bukhara stood proudly as one of the greatest centers of culture, trade, and learning in Central Asia. Its crowded markets were filled with merchants selling silk from China, spices from India, and precious goods from distant lands. Scholars gathered in its madrasas, discussing philosophy, mathematics, and religion. The city's magnificent mosques and towering walls seemed to symbolize strength, prosperity, and stability. To the people who lived there, Bukhara appeared eternal, a city that had survived generations of rulers and conflicts. Yet beyond the distant horizons, a force unlike any the region had ever witnessed was moving steadily closer. Travelers arriving from the east carried disturbing stories. They spoke of vast armies of horsemen sweeping across the land, destroying kingdoms that had once seemed invincible. These warriors served a man whose name inspired fear wherever it was spoken, Genghis Khan. Entire cities were said to have fallen before his armies. Refugees told tales of blazing settlements, defeated armies, and rulers who had underestimated the Mongol threat. Many citizens of Bukhara struggled to believe the rumors. Their city was protected by strong walls and defended by experienced soldiers. Surely such defenses would discourage any invader. Some believed the stories were exaggerated by frightened travelers. Others trusted that their rulers would protect them from whatever danger approached. As winter winds swept across the plains, daily life continued. Merchants opened their shops, children played in narrow streets, and prayers echoed from the city's mosques. Yet beneath the surface, anxiety was growing. Every new traveler brought more alarming reports. The Mongols were coming closer. Then one morning, watchmen standing atop the city walls saw something that chilled them to the bone. Massive clouds of dust stretched across the horizon. As the dust drew nearer, thousands of mounted warriors emerged. The Mongol army had arrived, and the people of Bukhara suddenly realized that their world was about to change forever. The arrival of the Mongol army transformed the atmosphere of Bukhara almost overnight. The confidence that had once filled the city was replaced by fear and uncertainty. From the walls, citizens watched endless ranks of horsemen encircle the city. Their banners fluttered in the cold wind while their camps spread across the surrounding plains. The Mongols moved with discipline and purpose, showing none of the disorder many had expected from a nomadic army. It soon became clear that these warriors had come not merely to threaten Bukhara, but to conquer it. Inside the city, preparations for defense intensified. Soldiers took their positions along the walls, archers gathered supplies, and officials attempted to reassure the population. Yet anxiety continued to grow. Families stored food in their homes and whispered prayers for protection. Mothers held their children close, while merchants worried that the prosperity they had spent years building could disappear within days. As the siege began, tension filled every corner of the city. The sounds of drums, shouted commands, and distant fighting echoed through the streets. The defenders resisted fiercely, hoping to repel the invaders and preserve their way of life. But the Mongols were experienced masters of siege warfare. They attacked relentlessly, searching for weaknesses in the city's defenses while maintaining constant pressure on the exhausted defenders. Days of struggle turned into a nightmare. Reports of breaches and casualties spread quickly. Smoke rose from damaged sections of the city, and panic began to replace hope. Citizens rushed through crowded streets seeking safety, while rumors circulated faster than facts. No one knew what the next hour would bring. Eventually, resistance weakened. The city's fate seemed unavoidable. When Mongol forces gained control, chaos erupted. Families became separated in the confusion, and countless people were gathered together under guard. The familiar order of life vanished in an instant. The people of Bukhara realized that the battle for their city was over, but a far more uncertain and frightening chapter was only beginning. In the days following the conquest, the people of Bukhara faced a reality more terrifying than many had imagined. The battle had ended, but the suffering was far from over. Streets that had once bustled with merchants, scholars, and travelers now felt eerily silent. Many buildings stood damaged, and the smoke of recent destruction still lingered in the air. Everywhere, families searched desperately for loved ones amid the confusion. The conquerors moved swiftly to establish control over the city. Large groups of residents were assembled in open areas where officials and soldiers determined their fate. No one knew what would happen next. Rumors spread through the crowds, each one more frightening than the last. Some claimed that skilled craftsmen would be taken away to serve elsewhere in the growing Mongol Empire. Others feared that young men would be forced into labor or military service. The uncertainty itself became a source of constant terror. For many women, the situation was especially heartbreaking. Mothers clung tightly to their children, afraid that even a brief separation could become permanent. Wives searched desperately for husbands who had disappeared during the fighting. Sisters called out the names of brothers who never answered. Every face in the crowd seemed to carry the same mixture of fear, exhaustion, and disbelief. Children cried from hunger and confusion, unable to understand why their world had changed so suddenly. Elderly residents sat silently, watching the city they had known all their lives transformed beyond recognition. The bonds that had held families and communities together for generations were being tested in ways few could have imagined. As days passed, many residents discovered that loved ones were gone, either killed during the conflict or separated during the aftermath. Homes once filled with laughter now stood empty. The conquest had not only taken control of a city, it had shattered countless lives. For the survivors, the pain of uncertainty and loss would remain long after the sounds of war had faded, becoming memories that would haunt them for years to come. As news of Bukhara's fall spread across Central Asia, the city became a symbol of the terrifying power of the Mongol Empire. Traders, refugees, and travelers carried stories from one settlement to another, describing how a prosperous and respected city had been overwhelmed by an enemy unlike any seen before. Each retelling added to the fear. Some stories were exaggerated, while others came from people who had witnessed the events with their own eyes. Regardless of their accuracy, they all delivered the same message. The Mongols were unstoppable. Within Bukhara itself, the survivors faced the difficult task of rebuilding their lives amid devastation. Entire neighborhoods had been damaged or abandoned. Market stalls that once overflowed with goods now stood empty. The sounds of business and learning that had defined the city for generations had been replaced by silence and uncertainty. Every ruined building served as a reminder of what had been lost. Many families struggled simply to survive. Food became scarce, and people often relied on whatever resources remained. Women who had lost husbands or fathers found themselves responsible for caring for children and elderly relatives. Every day brought new challenges, from finding shelter to securing enough food for the next meal. Yet despite their suffering, many refused to give up. At the same time, neighboring cities watched these developments with growing anxiety. Leaders and citizens alike understood that what had happened to Bukhara could happen to them as well. The city's fate became a warning repeated throughout the region. Some rulers began considering surrender rather than risking destruction. Others strengthened defenses and prepared for war, hoping they would fare better than Bukhara had. Months passed, but the scars remained visible everywhere. The physical damage could eventually be repaired, yet the emotional wounds were far deeper. Survivors carried memories of lost relatives, shattered homes, and the fear that had consumed their city. The conquest had ended, but its consequences continued to shape lives long afterward, leaving a legacy of grief, resilience, and remembrance that would endure for generations. The fall of Bukhara was not an isolated event. It was one chapter in a much larger campaign that would reshape much of the known world. As the Mongol armies continued their advance across Central Asia, stories of conquered cities followed in their wake. News traveled quickly along trade routes carried by merchants, refugees, and survivors who had witnessed entire communities transformed by war. Each story added to the growing reputation of the Mongols as a force capable of changing the fate of nations. For the people living in regions ahead of the Mongol advance, fear became a constant companion. Villages and cities that had once felt secure suddenly found themselves preparing for an uncertain future. Rulers gathered advisors to discuss strategies, while ordinary citizens prayed that the approaching armies would never reach their homes. Yet many knew that geography alone could not protect them from an empire expanding with astonishing speed. The human cost of these campaigns extended far beyond the battlefield. Families were uprooted, communities scattered, and generations forced to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Women often bore some of the heaviest burdens. With husbands, fathers, or brothers lost to war, many became the primary caretakers of their households. They worked tirelessly to provide food, shelter, and stability for their children despite living in an environment filled with uncertainty. Yet amid the hardship, signs of resilience began to emerge. Markets slowly reopened in some areas. Farmers returned to their fields. Craftsmen resumed their work, determined to preserve traditions that war had threatened to erase. People discovered ways to adapt, even when the world around them had been dramatically altered. The Mongol conquests left deep scars across Eurasia, but they did not erase the determination of those who survived. Communities rebuilt themselves piece by piece, drawing strength from shared experiences and the hope of a better future. Though the memory of destruction remained vivid, so too did the human capacity to endure. In the shadow of one of history's greatest empires, ordinary people fought their own battle, the struggle to reclaim their lives and preserve their identity. More than 8 centuries have passed since the Mongol conquest of Bukhara, yet the events of 1220 continue to fascinate historians and readers around the world. The city itself survived, rebuilt over generations by people determined not to let destruction define their future. Its streets once again filled with merchants, scholars, and travelers. New buildings rose where ruins had stood and life gradually returned. But while the physical scars of war faded, the memories remained. Chroniclers who wrote about the Mongol invasions described scenes of fear, loss, and upheaval that left a lasting impression on those who witnessed them. Their accounts passed from generation to generation, becoming part of the historical memory of Central Asia. Some details were debated, some numbers questioned, and some stories likely exaggerated over time. Yet the central truth remained unchanged. Countless ordinary people experienced suffering during one of history's most dramatic periods of conquest. Behind every historical record was a human story. There were mothers trying to protect their children during moments of chaos. There were families searching for loved ones who never returned. There were survivors forced to begin again after losing nearly everything they had known. These individuals rarely appear by name in history books, yet they formed the true heart of the story. The conquest of Bukhara also serves as a reminder of how fragile even the greatest cities can be. Wealth, powerful walls, and long traditions could not guarantee safety when confronted by a determined and highly organized empire. What seemed permanent could change within a matter of days. Yet the story is not only one of destruction, it is also a story of survival. The people who endured the conquest carried on despite unimaginable hardship. They rebuilt homes, restored communities, and preserved their culture for future generations. Their resilience ensured that Bukhara would not simply become a forgotten ruin. Today, when people look back at the events of 1220, they remember not only the power of conquerors but also the strength of those who survived. Their legacy continues to echo through history, reminding us that even in humanity's darkest moments, endurance can leave the deepest mark of all.